All right, we have begun recording. Hello and welcome back to Isildur's Shack. Um, my co-host Tyrillian is absent. I believe he's sleeping. So it's just gonna be me now. And with me is my guest, Serp, um, at Papist B on Twitter.
Hello.
Um, hey, buddy. And we're gonna be talking about Kino tonight. Well, I mean, it's nighttime in India, which is where I am. And related to that, I have to um, I have to let you guys know that it might get very loud and very noisy on my end because Indian noises.
Why is India such a loud country?
I don't think it's I don't think it's don't think it's India per se. It's just that it's just that this particular room that I am in, where my computer is, it's it's next to the street, even though it's like three floors up. um a lot of noise does somehow filter in. I think we're gonna have to trust to Discord's AI noise suppression. So yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so you want to introduce us to tonight's subject matter?
Well, we're going to talk about high-level art. We're talking about classic cinema. We are talking about, of course, the action film, um, one of the staples of cinema throughout its history, particularly from the 1970s until the 1990s, I would say is the golden age of the action film. Of course, there are other genres which kind of link to the action film, arguably like something like the Western or the spy thriller are very integrated within the action film, or especially in the 90s, most science fiction films were essentially action films with a sci-fi element. But
Uh-huh.
sadly, as we'll get to later, the action film has declined. So, but I think we should start off with what
Yeah.
makes action films so comfy. Why are they so comfy? Why are they
Why?
such
Yes.
easy
Yes.
watch?
Why are action so comfy? Why do we love them so much? Um, does it speak to a particular disposition that we have, or I mean, certainly it's not us liking them is not unique to us, obviously, right? Because
I
there's such
feel
a
it is a universal, like you're
yeah,
getting to 80% of all men on Earth
yeah,
are going to live action films.
yep, yes, yes. I mean, show me someone who hates Dolph Lundgren, and I'll show you someone who is not Dolph Lundgren.
Damn.
Yeah. Doesn't Tyrion dislike action movies?
No, I think that if he is, that's because he's a weenie boy.
Oh, okay,
But
fair
I don't
enough.
think
Yeah.
so.
All right. All
I
right.
think that he dislikes the apex film of the genre, Roadhouse, because he's a weenie boy.
By the way, speaking of Roadhouse, what a great movie. There's no problem that you cannot solve by
I
Roundhouse taking it.
When I get very sick, I watch Roadhouse just so that like if I were to die, it'd be the last film I ever saw.
Best.
Um, I will say this with action films, there's just something about even if to say like I like horror movies a lot or I like you know historical films because of my background in history, like drama,
Uh-huh.
that type of drama film, or
Uh-huh.
like a more artistic science fiction film. While
Uh-huh.
those movies may all be good or very good,
Right.
a dumb action film is immediately digestible. It doesn't matter
That's
how
right.
exhausted I am or how overwhelmed with whatever I am, that
That's right.
there's something when you watch an action film, and even if it's objectively a worse film than like some like moving drama, it is just immediately watchable, immediately enjoyable, and immediately appealing to wherever you are in your life.
Yes, that's a very good way of putting it. I think so. Uh, the question that naturally follows is, how would you describe an action movie? Would you consider war films as action movies? I mean, would you consider something like um, let's say just uh,
Okay, like let's say, do you find something like Saving Private Ryan a action film?
no,
No, but do you
no.
find um, do you find Rambo
American Ninja
2 to be
4.
an action film? Do you find
Yes,
Rambo 2 to be an action film? Well, you could
absolutely, yes.
argue that in a sense both of these are war films. What do you think makes Rambo 2 an action film?
Oh, this episode is going to be a Socratic dialogue. I like this very much. Okay, so I think what distinguishes a Rambo, a Rambo 2 from Saving Private Ryan is that Rambo 2 does not pretend to be something that it's not. Right? It doesn't pretend to explore the, well, let's say, the damage that a warfare does to civilians, for example, or how no one comes out unscathed, even though it may show these things, these facts in a much more skillful way, which I would argue the first Rambo absolutely does. The first Rambo movie, First Blood, does, um, in a in a far more artistic way than Saving Private Ryan. Saving Private Ryan, it pretends, if not pretends, then it certainly conceives of itself as a highbrow um, effort. Um, it shows the truth, or tries to um, show the show a certain a certain kind of truth about the Second World War, whereas Rambo 2 doesn't. I mean, Rambo 2 is about Rambo. It's not about Vietnam.
Hmm. I think that what you have to define an action film is that action film is really defined by the focus upon the action itself. It's the exploitation, right? I would say action films are all exploitation films, and that they exploit uh, kind of the glory or the appeal of the action within an event. So, say something like Saving Private Ryan, or All Quiet on the Western Front, or
Or We Were Soldiers. I
Platoon,
mean,
or
yeah,
We Were Soldiers. All these films depict action within war, but the point of the film is not the action itself. While
right.
a movie that is examining war would be, say, the Rambo series, like 2, 3, and 4, are
Uh
dealing
huh.
with wars, but
Uh
the
huh.
appeal isn't the Soviet-Afghan War in Rambo 3. In The Dirty Dozen, World War II is not the focus of the movie; it's the action itself, or something like Inglorious Bastards.
Right.
I think that you kind of have to see that clear distinction throughout the action film, is that the primary focus is the violence itself. It is a glorification of violence for its very appeal to men.
Interesting. So, would you regard Inglorious Bastards as an action movie, or would you
Oh
regard
yeah,
it as
yeah, I would
okay?
say so. Much more of
Interesting.
an action movie than a traditional war
Right.
film.
Right. right. And so presumably you would regard the Django movie, right? What's his face? Quentin
Tarantino's.
Tarantino. Yeah,
Here's the problem you get with like an action movie. Um, Many westerns would be action movies, but
right,
not all westerns are action movies, right? So like a lot of Italian movies, like the original Django, are
right,
very action centric. Um,
right.
I mean, ironically, I think that you could say Tarantino's Django, is it Django Untamed or Django Unchained? It's nowhere
Django
near as good as
Unchained, I think. It's
The
Django Unchained.
original Django from '66. That movie is incredible. It has a Gatling gun. Like the main character just takes a Gatling gun and just destroys everybody. Um, Franco
Hmm.
Nero is, of course, the apex Mega Chad,
Right,
one of the Mega Chads of humanity.
right.
Did you see the movie The Pope's Exorcist?
Yes, yes, I have. Was a very
Yes, he
silly
is.
movie. Was a
But
very
he's
silly
John
movie,
Paul
but I
II
liked
in
it.
it.
You are right. Yes. You know,
Um,
to be honest, the only reason I watched Django Unchained was to see Christoph Waltz in it. Um, he's Colonel Hans Landa. You are hiding Abby Shapiro under the
ooh,
floorboards, aren't you? Yeah.
damn.
Uh, okay. So a random question before we proceed: would you regard what's his face? Yeah. Would you regard Back to the Future Part 3 as a western?
Yes, because and we're talking about genre and how you define genre, at least in the context of film. It's pretty difficult because what is a western? It's really just the setting. The
Right.
setting is what makes a western film because if you go through westerns, some of these movies are action movies. Some
Right.
of them are drama movies, some of them are comedy movies. Like a lot of
Uh
them
huh.
are historical epics. Um,
That's
but I
true.
mean,
Yeah.
even something like um, Back to Future Part 3, it's a western, even if it's a sci-fi film because of its setting. The
Right.
Valley of Guanji is a Lost World fantasy movie,
Uh huh.
but because it's set in 19th century Mexico or 19th century American West, it's
Uh huh.
going to become a western. But what defines an action movie is the focus upon violence, and violence in a very violence to objects, violence to people in a very non-gory manner. Because then you could say, well, a
Would you
gore
say?
film,
Would you say that it's? You say that it's violence without consequences, or
yeah, violence
violence? Okay.
glorified without necessarily the consequences, right? That's
Right.
a
Right.
pretty good way to say it, because the action film really has it's another very key part of it is that it has a hero. That you can't
Right. Yeah.
really
Yeah.
have an action movie without a hero. Now,
Without
sometimes it's an
without a hero.
anti-hero, but even like these anti-heroes, like Paul Kersey or Snake Plissken in Escape from New York,
What a
even
great
if they
movie.
are action, or even if they are anti-heroes within the way that they're stated within the plot, they don't really do that many evil things. They're not
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
anti-heroes in the way that they would be in like a spaghetti western
Right.
or some kind of like revenge-based horror movie.
Right.
They're really positive protagonists even within an action film. An action film um, is mainly supposed to make you have like a positive feeling. Make you
Right.
it's you're
So
supposed to feel good based on the violence that occurs within the movie and watching it.
this makes me wonder. Uh, so given how the actors, the hero is supposed to be a positive, person, would you say that the reluctance of the hero to get involved in the plot itself makes for an important plot point? I mean, if you think of, let's say, the Delta Force or Commando or Missing in Action, then uh, the uh, then the primary thing of all three of these movies is that um, well, Chuck Norris in both, um, in two of the three, and Arnold Schwarzenegger in the other one, they're retired special forces guys who are dragged back into fighting. So does that do you think that plays a part? The reluctant
Yeah, definitely,
hero?
because there's
Okay.
like this idea, right? There's this idea that the action of being a soldier or being a cop is dehumanizing in the violence that you do. So oftentimes you'll have this examination of violence, and it kind of has to justify itself through because like in some sense, right? The violence is real. That when a police officer takes down this drunk or meth head, like that
Uh-huh.
guy still has a family. He may beat his wife, but he still had kids. Like there's still a loss there. There's still a tragedy in the loss
Right.
of human
Uh-huh.
life.
Yeah.
So a lot of the times, you got to have the main character has to be reluctant to use his violence because that makes him real. It's really hard to have show violence and have the main character be gleeful in the violence he puts forward.
Right. Right. Oh, which will which makes me think of something else that we'll have to explore in some detail later on in a later segment of this episode. But I'm gonna mention it now so that we don't forget about it. Is that how do you feel about the Expendables movie? Because it's basically about 80s and 90s action heroes who have gone into retirement and who are forced back into the field as it as it were, um, despite having moved on from it. Do you say that it's a that it functions as a meta commentary on the genre, or
I don't think so. I mean, I haven't seen the third movie. I actually ended up seeing the fourth one in the movie theater when it
okay?
came out.
How was it? I mean, it didn't
It
come out
was
all that long ago, did it?
I think I liked it the best out of all the group of people I saw. One of my friends fell asleep. Um,
Oh wow, wow.
Stallone is in it for like 5 minutes. It's
Uh huh.
it's pretty underwhelming. I actually never was that big a fan of the Expendables.
Okay.
I think that the movie kind of runs into this problem. Is that they're casting all these guys that are in their 60s or in some cases in their 70s now to
Yeah.
to be doing what they did when they're 20 or not 20, not even 20, 30 years ago, or even in some cases 40 years ago.
That's right. Yeah.
And they're just not up to it. So I don't know if it's necessarily bad filming some of the times or bad cinematography, but
Uh huh.
there's a lot of like cutting away from the action. A lot of like Stallone or the other characters that are older tend to be slower. Um, I
Right.
don't know. It
Right.
just kind of feels like
Right. Right.
the
Right. Right.
name of these people is more of the selling point than the
Then
action
right.
within the movie itself.
Right. So it's located somewhere between um a possible meta commentary and a shameless cash grab.
Yes, because
Is
it's
what
kind
you're
of like
saying? Okay. Fair enough.
I think they made a Crocodile Dundee movie recently where he's like in
Oh,
his
yes.
70s or his 80s. Yeah. And they made I refuse to see in the movie theater. They made Indiana Jones 5 recently where he was 80 when he made it. And it's like, you know, these people should go off in the sunset. It actually I think undermines the action film to have these people running around in their 70s and 80s. I mean, they can
Yeah.
be supporting characters. I think
Yes.
that it's very good for them to be supporting characters and they can do a good
Right.
role in films. But
Right.
I think being this main lead character,
Being something that they can no longer be
they yeah,
doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't
it
do them any
basically
favors. Yeah.
it
Agree.
basically waters down the action
Uh
and
huh. Uh huh.
basically kind of causes the action movie to decline because it's stuck on focusing on these old characters or old
Unless
character actors, I
unless
should
it's
say.
something like the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which is all things considered a pretty good movie. I
Yeah, but I
mean,
think that is an exception that proves the rule because Sean
right.
Connery in that movie um, is a supporting character. The example I was thinking of was Sean Connery in the third Indiana Jones movie
Right.
as a
Yeah.
supporting character. I think that he does a very good job as a supporting character.
Uh huh. Uh huh.
Um, do you want to get into what I kind of find within action movies is the plot is kind of secondary, and we are talking about
It is.
this in terms of the movie Commando. So Commando isn't about America in the
I
1980s
mean, I
knocking
mean the
off third world countries that much and like
look,
preventing
man.
them from turning socialist.
Uh, the plot of Commando is thinner than single ply toilet paper. Okay, like I have wiped with paper thicker than Commando's plot line. Like it literally makes zero sense. It's just it makes less than zero sense. It's just it's incredible just how paper thin the plot is and how you know they know it makes no sense. You know it makes no sense, but you watch it and then you rewatch it again and again because it's such a great movie and the action is so awesome,
Mm-hmm.
right?
And then another, I think, a really good example is like the James Bond movies. I mean, I
Yes.
guess some of them are about espionage to more or lesser extent, but taken as
Yeah.
a whole,
Yeah.
the series is largely about the adventure of being in a foreign land and the action of James Bond as being a charismatic hero.
I mean, certainly used to be the case until Pierce Brosnan. So until Die Another Day, right? Or was that is that the name of the is that the name of his last Bond movie, or was
I
it
thought
De-
the world isn't it the world is forever. Look at we're like we got to bring up show notes and stuff. We're definitely the best hero or historians of the genre.
Yeah, I have.
So let's go through the his four are I'm bringing them up. Golden Eye, Tomorrow Never Dies, The World Is
Yes,
Not Enough, and Die Another Day.
yes. So Die Another Day, I believe it came out in what 2004, I think.
2002.
2002, right? It was about the North Korean guy and that big laser thing that blew up all of the minefields in the demilitarized zone. And it
Isn't
had
that
an
supposed to be one of the most retarded of all the James Bond movies?
it was, if you ask me, it was not a particularly good James Bond movie, and I'm including the one which had the Australian James Bond guy. I mean, the Australian guy playing James Bond,
Is
and I'm
that
including.
is that Her Majesty's Secret Service?
I think so. Yes.
We're not the best. We're doing terrible because we're not the best Bond historians. So
No, no, no. We are
Lazenby,
not.
yeah, he's
Yes.
Australian.
Yeah.
I have a friend who really likes James Bond, and he actually considers on Her Majesty's Secret Service to be one of his definitive best movies of the series, and he loves it.
Okay. Fair enough. Yeah. Um. Uh, remember that Family Guy cutaway where um, I think it was Peter who said Her Majesty's Secret Cervix. That was
Damn,
so fun. That was so funny.
damn! I
Yeah.
should put you through a meat shredder for referencing that. I don't. I don't really like Daniel Craig Bond. It just kind of seems like a ripoff
The
of
guy has no
Born
charisma.
Identity. Yeah,
I mean, the guy has zero charisma. Yeah, Born Identity. What do you think about? Do those in your mind classify as action movies, or are
they're
they?
action movies, but
But
they
the
have not done a good
espionage.
service to action films.
Right, right, right. Yeah, yeah. Fair enough.
They're not my thing. Um,
Yeah,
Pretty
fair enough.
bad filmmaking. But I think another example is buddy cop movies. Right? They're about the
Yes.
glory of shooting down bad guys. They're about the glory of withholding the law and protecting civilians and innocent people. Right? They're not
What's
about
more,
real police
they're not
procedure
about
in any meaningful
exactly,
way.
exactly. I mean, we have real police procedure in what Rizzolian Isles or
Well,
CSI
I mean,
or
it's a completely different genre. The buddy cop film is part of the action genre.
yeah.
A police procedure drama, like a realistic crime film, is on its own a different genre, which is very popular, and the two genres do not mix.
No, they don't. I mean, yeah. So I mean, the thing about police work is that it's a team effort, and shows like in Criminal Minds, for example, they do a very good job of demonstrating that. Something that action movies, by their very definition, right, will fail at because action movies have one charismatic leading man, as you said, and even if it's something like what's the one movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger and is it Jim Belushi? I think I'm thinking of Red Heat. Red Heat, 1988.
Is that where he comes over and Arnold is from the
Yes, he
Soviet
is a
Union?
Russian. Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah, yeah. With
yeah,
Jim Belushi, it is Red Heat.
yeah, yeah. He is Red Heat. What a great movie! What an absolutely awesome movie! It's one of my favorites. One of my favorites. What a great.
Um, I think
Yeah,
that
like
we should go back to the whole charismatic angle and how important that is to the action film as well.
yeah,
It really is Chad exploitation.
it is.
Um,
Chad's exploitation.
because
Mm.
I mean the point of the movie to a certain extent, and I know that there's women that like action movies. But the point of the movie and a big point of the genre is the male audience identifying with the lead and wanting to be that lead. The movie is, in a sense, performative wish fulfillment.
Oh God, yes, I want to be Arnold Schwarzenegger. See, this is one of the reasons why I love BAP so much because I think he's Arnold Schwarzenegger, but then you know, and yeah, I'm also profoundly autistic. So
Consequences.
what
Consequences of autism.
consequences of autism? Yeah. No, please go on.
I think
What?
going back to like Daniel Craig,
Ah,
and the decline of action movies in the 2000s, I think that there is some kind of truth that like at that time and into the 2010s that there was like this kind of like this postmodern anti
anti
formulaic
Giga
kind
Chad
of,
movement. Yes,
yeah,
there
there
was
was
an
this
anti
idea
Giga
that
Chad movement.
they should put all these we should have action films where the main character is not charismatic, where the main character is just a normal another guy.
Yeah,
And I think that really undermined the action film alongside, the superhero movie or pushing out senior citizens to do stuff that they did 30 or 40 years ago. to
Yeah,
keep going. I think that that's kind of
yeah.
part of the decline too. Is that you just
Take
have a lot of these uncharismatic people, and then you had what was it, Mila Jovovich, and that whole like beginning
Mila
of trying to force
Jovovich. Yes.
in Jovovich.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Resident Evil movies and
Yes.
trying to like force female action stars. And
Yes.
she, so the other thing about her is she's not very even like, even with the fakey thing of like, 120 pound, 130 pound woman knocking
Yeah. Just
over,
yeah.
180 pound guy, and like, we all know that that can't happen, and that your brain just says fake, not real immediately when you see it.
Uh-huh.
Even beyond all that stuff, she's not charismatic.
I have a question regarding that. So, would you consider the worst offenders in that regard to be the Charlie's Angels movies, the ones with Cameron Diaz, Lucy Liu, and Drew Barrymore? Uh, because
I've never sat down and watched them because I have standards.
you are
But
casting shade on me, but I deserve it, so I'll let this one go. Uh,
uh, what were you getting at though? Were they even worse than like the Resident Evil movies?
they, I, again, unless I'm much mistaken, they predate the Resident Evil movies by at least a couple of years, and
I
they
think
do show
they're
like 100, like they do show like 110 pound women, just completely
yeah. So the
annihilating
first
300
Resident
pound
Evil
boys.
movie is like 2002, and Charlie's Angels is 2000.
Okay, yeah,
I never watched them. I would say this though: those movies are significantly more comedic than uh, you know, the Resident
they're more
Evil and Resident Evil
self-aware.
Apocalypse and
Yes,
stuff. Yeah,
like they're more self-aware. Yeah, certainly more self-aware. Um, yeah, there's also the problem. Like, can you name one contemporary movie actor who is as well built as Dolph Lundgren or as Arnold Schwarzenegger was? I mean, can you name one?
no, nobody within Hollywood released films, right?
Yeah, no one.
It's
I mean,
interesting though at the same time, because it seems that maybe this is my perception of being on the internet, and I'm not really a weightlifter myself, but it seems that weightlifting is more popular than ever before. But that
exactly, yeah,
type of man is not glorified within the media.
exactly, yeah. And meanwhile, you have guys like Timothy Chalamet, right? Um, who is, yeah, it's just find him gross. Timothy Chalamet. Family Guy finds him gross. That should tell you something.
I don't. What is he in?
Wasn't he in one of those Timothy
I
Chalamet?
know who you're talking about,
Yeah,
and he has.
he was he was in the Dune movie, and he
Oh,
was,
that guy.
yeah, that guy.
Yeah, the Paul
And
Twink Paul.
we try to keep this a family friendly show, but okay.
I don't know, but like, I mean, it's effective that you use that term because
That is true. Yeah,
that's what he
yeah,
is.
yeah, yeah. Um, that is certainly what he looks like. Yeah, it's just not a very compelling. Don't think there are any more. I mean, the Hemsworth brothers could plausibly, right,
I guess that they had that
build up them.
Netflix one with Hemsworth.
Yeah, but like no, I don't think he can carry it off on his own. And people are used to imagining him as Thor, right?
Mhm.
And that kind of degrades
we will get into the superhero film further down the line, but I think we should
Okay.
start on where did action films begin? And we talked a little bit earlier about westerns, and we talked
Uh-huh.
about war films. I think those are two genres that kind of laid a groundwork for what would become the action genre within, at least within like Western cinema.
Right.
Um, I think after World War II happened, um, it's interesting because the more time that there's been since World War II, the more World War II is made serious within media. The closer you see a movie made to World War II, oftentimes those movies depict World War II, and that's because I'm sure many veterans watch those movies, or silent generation that would have been aware of what was going on but not able to serve. They would
Right.
have
Yeah.
been more nostalgic. Of course, the Germans are depicted as much more heroic. That the SS is evil, but the average German soldier was an honorable person
Yeah.
that was caught in bad circumstances, whether it was serving his country or the Japanese soldier.
Right.
And a lot of those movies in the post-war era, a really good example is something like The Dirty Dozen or The Great
Yes.
Escape.
Yeah.
Those type of movies are really more of action movies than the traditional type of like war movie. I mean, there were also World War II kind of like war movies, something like Bridge on the River Kwai
Yes.
at the same time. But a lot of those movies that kind of exploited World War II during that time, right after the war, and would have been watched by veterans, kind of portray serving within the military, um, is something within the American and British perspective, and Canadian too as well. The kind of like a
Hmm.
general Western perspective
Hmm.
as
Hmm.
something that was done amongst men, something that was like this manly activity, something that's nostalgic, and something that kind of like gave them a lot of honor in their lives and gave them just like that they had gave them merit and character.
Hmm.
And so like newer movies, right, they're going to focus a lot more on the Shoah. The evils of Germany for political reasons are increasingly more intense in movies about World War II. Movies like Saving Private Ryan or Fury or Unbreakable or so on, those movies are going to depict
Right.
war as being much more carnage laden.
Right.
Not that like it's tragic in The Great Escape when somebody dies, but those other movies are going
Or
to.
even in Bridge on the River Kwai. But I do see your point. I think a good a movie that avoided most of these pitfalls, but have a bunch of other problems is Inglorious Bastards. Um,
Mm-hmm.
because
Well, Inglorious Bastards is actually a because Tarantino does that. Inglorious Bastards was part of Italian. There's actually Inglorious Bastards from the '70s because the Italians had their own genre of World War II based action movies, and
Mhm.
that was one of the famous ones in that genre.
Right.
1978 Inglorious Bastards, right?
I I think so. I haven't seen the Italian. I haven't seen the Italian one, but I do believe you. Um,
It's
which
basically an Italian ripoff of The Dirty Dozen.
I see. So, which makes me think, right? I mean, do action movies have to involve guns, or can they be, martial arts action movies as well? I mean, would
Both,
you,
both.
would, okay, okay, because I mean, Enter the Dragon, right? I mean, it pretends to be about espionage, but we are not in it to look at the espionage plotline. We're in it to see Bruce Lee kick ass and
Yep.
break necks and so on, right? So would you consider the very formulaic 1960s and 70s and 80s and 90s wuxia and some of the less stylized Hong Kong martial arts movies as being prototypical action movies? Or
Yes, absolutely. I think that
okay,
it doesn't matter if it's action done with firefights in firefights
right,
with
right,
or
right,
between buddy cops or something like that, or
yeah,
like some less or more mythologized version of World War II, or like
right.
a Rambo, or if it is solely martial arts, I think those would qualify as an action movie. I think one of the ones we are debating is that I consider really car centric or car chase movies. So like Fast and the Furious, in my mind, is an action movie series. While in your
Interesting.
mind, you define it as a non-action movie series.
I mean, I would define it as a car movie
Yeah,
and
but
not
I
as
would define a
yeah.
lot of car movies as action movies, especially ones that have to
Interesting.
do with like car
What
chases
about
and
what
like
about what
crashes.
about okay, so what about XXX State of the Union?
Unfortunately, I have not seen that one, so I'm not aware. I was gonna say something
Okay,
like Death Race 2000 or like Vanishing Point. Those type of movies from
okay,
the 70s, I
okay.
would definitely say are action movies.
Interesting.
A lot of the car chase scenes in The French Connection, even if like that movie wouldn't be in general an action movie, kind of like like stand on the line between an action movie and an espionage movie.
Incidentally, what would you consider to be the best car chase on screen?
I think The French Connection.
Okay, uh, I would
A lot of
disagree
them in
with
James
you
Bond
there.
too, if you go into it, are
I
pretty
would
good.
disagree. I would disagree with you there. I would say that the best car chase on film is the one in what's it called? Yes, in the Born Identity.
Really?
Yeah, it is certainly the most tightly shot. It makes the best use of the resources available, and I think it has very little in the way of CGI. Like very little
Base.
in the way of CGI. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So,
I
would
just
you
don't
say
like the Bourne movies because of their editing, the kind of like shaky
okay?
cam.
Okay, yeah,
I
yeah,
just
yeah,
find
yeah, yeah,
disheartening and gross.
yeah. Man, I like Dutch angles so much. They're so cool. Yeah.
Turellian cannot watch Dutch angles. If a movie has too many Dutch angles, he says that it basically makes him nauseous. So
I mean, that
based.
is a very sensible response and based of him that he can do that. Um, yeah, but you know how Wes Anderson was made of by Family Guy, and Peter said, "Cinema is an event," and I have repeated that to Tyrion so many times, and he just gets really upset. Yeah, yeah. I will just randomly say, "Cinema is an event."
Cinema is an event. Well, that's what we're here for.
Yeah,
And we talked about like Western movies being a really good precursor, and the whole like idea of the gunfights within Western movies. And a lot of Western movies have very charismatic figures. So I think that the Western movie is a natural
yeah,
precursor of the action movie. But
yeah.
I think that a really good starting point, and we talked about Bond a little bit, is in the 1960s with the Sean Connery Bond. I think once you
Right.
get to that, we clearly have the classic formula of an action movie beginning
Uh-huh.
with Doctor No and From Russia with Love and so on. Those are very you have the charismatic lead. You have the secondary this like the focus of the story, like the espionage is a pretty secondary thing, and then the primary focus of the movie being the violence of the action itself.
That's right. Yes. 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 So, I mean, I'm pretty sure. Again, I don't know much about this at, at all. But I think one of the reasons why there was a decline in in action movies post the 1990s um, was the consolidation of the independent studios into
Yes.
yeah.
Well,
I
that kind
mean,
of goes into the 70s. I think that going forward in the 70s, you have the collapse of the American studio system. Of course, the end of British cinema as being a world power, right? British cinema kind of just like fades away in the distance as like a fart in the wind in the 70s. A lot of their studios collapse. Americans
uh-huh,
stop making movies in Britain. And you have the rise of New Hollywood, the end of the Hays Code around 66 to 1968.
uh-huh,
So you're allowed to show a lot more violence, a lot more sex, get E. Michael Jones in trouble or yelling at you, depending on
yeah,
whatever
yeah,
he's talking about.
yeah.
And you have kind of this explosion of all these different types of films in the 70s. You have the explosion of
Of the
the
extremely
romantic movie
cynical,
with a lot of nudity. You have the explosion of horror movies, but you
yeah,
also have the explosion of the
of
action movie, and in particular, a certain type of action movie in the 70s,
the
the
vigilante
vigilante
action.
film.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, 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 exactly.
Um, we get Paul Kersey and Death Wish, and just
Uh-huh.
a lot of movies like that at that
You
time.
get
Dirty
Dirty
Harry.
Harry. Yeah.
Um, and just because like what was really going on in America and Britain is that the liberalization of the 70s resulted in the greatest explosion in crime in the history of the Anglosphere. You know, it was the explosion of serial killers and stuff like that because, people could go to jail for a few years if they murdered somebody at that time. It's really insane if you go back into it.
Uh-huh.
You have uncontrollable, like, muggings, white flight, just a very terrible time to be in the Anglosphere. The crime was just completely out of control. And
By the way,
so,
have you seen Black Gestapo?
what is
Appar-
this?
Apparently, it's both Nazi exploitation and black exploitation.
Is this a Ooh, it is in the 70s. Yeah, another thing that's
It's
going
19,
on in the 70s is,
yeah,
black exploitation.
yeah.
You have Nazi exploitation,
And
um,
let's not
which is
forget
kind of a lot of the times
after
Nazi exploitation is kind of softcore, though.
yes, was that the Lisa or Elsa She Wolf of the SS, that movie?
Yeah, yeah, that's kind of like the big one.
Yeah, yeah.
What's really
Um,
weird about it is that a lot of like um, Nazi exploitation was made by Italians, and so you have this
I
weird idea:
was
is it
aware
like
of
this
this.
guilt over fascist Italy, or are they just like they're just doing it because it's funny, or they find it fun? And it's just kind of this weird question about Nazi
Right,
exploitation.
right. Um, eh, what, what was that? Yes, yes. I think my favorite subgenre of exploitation though is Bruce exploitation, where people looking vaguely like Bruce Lee pretended to be Bruce Lee
Yes.
in really 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 low budget Hong Kong movies like
Well, is the 70s the beginning of the kung fu film in Hong Kong cinema?
no, definitely not
Or is it
the beginning,
predated
but
by some
it
period?
it predates it. I think the first wuxia movies were made in like 1920s, I think 1910s or
Ooh.
1920s. I mean, it comes from Hong Kong theater, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, it comes from Hong Kong
But it's
theater. So
definitely with Bruce Lee the time when the Western world and the
uh,
world at large becomes
that's right. Yeah,
aware of it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. By the
I mean,
way,
Bruce
have you
Lee
seen?
is a pretty important figure in the history of
And he deserves it.
Eastern cinema in general.
he deserves a separate episode on his own. By the way, have you
Oh,
seen
oh,
Samurai?
go ahead. Go about yours first. Yeah.
Oh, I was just wondering if you've seen Samurai Cop.
Unfortunately, not.
You
You need
really
to
should.
show me a lot of these things. I That is a humiliation that I've not seen Samurai Cop.
Well, I
Is
mean,
it a masterpiece?
it is a masterpiece. It is on the same level as Roadhouse, but
Ooh,
unlike Roadhouse, um, almost the entirety of Samurai Cop was shot during daytime because the director and the producer they ran out of money and could not afford the lights to shoot at night. So
based red pill.
yeah, it's such an awesome movie. I mean,
What I
it's
have
got a
very
lot of
little
music.
experience with it, but for samurai films, would you do you watch a lot of them? They're usually
Yes, I
included
have
as
watched.
action films.
So I have watched samurai. Well, I have watched a bunch of samurai movies and a bunch of what's it called? Yeah, ninja movies. And these incidentally have mostly been ones with Michael Dudikoff in them. So yes, if you're thinking of the American Ninja movies, yes, those I have. I have
Ooh,
watched all. Yeah, I have watched all of the American Ninja movies.
let's move
Um,
into the 80s, the golden
yes,
age.
yes, yes,
Talking
the golden.
about American Ninja,
What a decade. What
could
an
you
absolute
describe to
decade.
everybody what canon is? Canon
Okay,
films.
okay, so Canon Films is a gift to mankind from God. All right? Canon Films made the Delta Force, and it made American Cyborg 2's Steel Warrior, and it made Revenge of the Ninja. It made American Ninja. It made it
Cobra.
made what it made Cobra. Yes, yes. It made Ninja 3 the domination. It made Missing in Action. Yes, it made Missing in Action. It made pretty much it made Chuck Norris's career is what I'm saying. Great producing house. Great production house.
So
Um Go
Canon
on.
Film Group was they were a film company that existed, I guess, in '67 to 1994. But
Yeah.
Golan and Globus, which were two, are they cousins? They're not brothers, right? They're cousins. They're
I
two
think they're
Israeli
cousins.
cousins, yeah, that
Yeah.
moved to America, acquired Canon, and then basically turned it into the mega house of action movies throughout the 1980s into the early 1990s.
Yep.
And so um, they were kind of the backbone of the golden age of American action movies.
Yep. It made it made like a good 50 to 60% of all of my favorite movies. So it made Kickboxer and Bloodsport. All right, those are movies that you have to watch because they're so awesome. They made a Walker Texas Ranger, the TV shows. Well, some of them. It made Chain of Command. I think again we have to. Dude, we really have to watch Michael Dudikoff together. We have to watch
Big
his.
brain.
We have to watch his movies together. So awesome.
Um,
Like they have wooden acting, like zero CGI, because computers cost quite a lot of money to operate those days. So it made a lot more sense to do practical effects back in the day.
the golden
No,
days.
yeah. Incidentally, I just looked it up. It made an unofficial sequel to Bridge on the River Kwai called Return from the River Kwai. Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, all the Death Wish sequels are made by Canon, of course.
And Canon also made one of the best movies ever. It's called Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
That was Canon.
Yeah, that was Canon.
Okay. Um. So anyway, the '80s is also where you start to get the buddy cop film.
Yeah,
Um, is the first like true buddy cop film? Is that 48 Hours,
I think so.
or
Yeah,
is there precursors?
I mean there must be, but I mean there's obviously someone who is likely who done something very like a buddy cop thing before the movie that gets this really big break. But
Of course, from 48 Hours, we spawned Lethal Weapon, Bad
yes.
Boys, Rush Hour, the whole entire buddy cop genre,
What's your what's
which
your
starts
thought
out there in
on
the '80s.
Rush Hour, by the way? What's your thought on
I
Rush
am
Hour?
a noob again. I don't have
Okay.
that strong thoughts on it because I haven't seen
Okay.
it since I was like a little kid.
I have a question. Do you consider RoboCop to be a buddy cop movie? Because um
That's an interesting thought. I've never thought about it as a buddy cop movie.
yeah,
I guess it has some of those elements, but I think that RoboCop just kind of stands as its own as the main character of it.
right. Apparently there's a RoboCop novelization. I have the book, but I haven't read it yet. It's by this guy with think is by Eric Naha. Well, I think that's the name of the person. Yeah, I need to read it. Need I need to read it. Uh,
Anyway, so there's also like you kind of get the Vietnam kind of revenge film at that
yeah,
time
yeah,
with the Rambo series with Rambo First Blood. It touches on a lot of like it's a vigilante movie like the 1970s movies, and vigilante movies kind of start to peter out into the 1980s, and the 1980s
uh-huh,
is compared to the 1970s. The 1980s is a much more social decade with a lot of the films there. In the 1970s are more of an antisocial decade, but just a lot of films showing special forces or
yeah.
other people, elite forces fighting and
Fighting behind enemy lines.
fighting enemies of America, and they're not war films, right? And it's like
Yeah, they're not.
there's
Yeah, they're not.
glory in battle, glory in her heroism, right? The
Yeah.
most infamous and famous is Top Gun.
Yes.
Um,
Oh, what a
do you
great movie.
consider Top Gun to be a horror or a action movie?
Um. So the problem with Top Gun is that we don't really get to see all that much action in Top Gun, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's my only problem with Top Gun. It just leads up to it, but then the action we do get to see is kind of anemic.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my only problem. I mean, otherwise I have no problems with Top Gun. So I don't know if I would consider it to be a yeah um yeah. Uh, what do you think?
So, I think so. I think again because it's the glory of action, of violence. And I should say this, I think I talked about this earlier, is the only time when you see the glory of violence outside of the action film, and of course there is like within RoboCop, right? There is some crossover
Yes.
some other movies, but the gore film, I think, is a glorification of violence done to the human body, where you see the human body torn about, but it usually falls under the horror banner because
Uh-huh.
the disgust involved with seeing the human body torn apart draws it towards horror movies. But
Yeah,
RoboCop, of course, is a good example of a gore movie within the action genre. Um,
right.
have you ever seen Riccio?
I have seen a Rikyo.
I think that's a good example of a gore movie, action movie.
Yes. Ah, man, there's nothing like taking out the intestines of your rival and choking him to death with it.
I Every time I see Riccio or people talk about the movie, I mean, is there some kind of reason that he doesn't just punch a hole through the wall and just run away through like 90% of the movie until the very end?
The wall has plot armor.
Okay.
Yeah. By the way, have you seen the Michael Dudikoff remake of Executive Decision?
No, you just keep like running circles around me.
It's
You're the
called
master and
Strategic
I am the
Command.
apprentice.
It's called Strategic Command. It's actually super funny because a lot of these canon films movies are on YouTube, so you can actually see them.
Are they
Um,
officially on YouTube or do people just put them there and then
I mean,
canon doesn't exist anymore so they don't get
canon
taken
doesn't
down?
exist anymore, so no one can take them down. And these were direct to home, direct to
Are
VHS
these
movies
like
anyway.
late camera when or late canon when they were really
Like
struggling?
they're like 1990 and 1997.
Yeah.
No, yeah. Like, yeah, like late 90s. Yeah. Have you
Anyway,
s- have you seen Black Thunder?
no, you just keep. I'm like, I want to go on because you're just humiliating me. You're just riding circles
sorry,
around
sorry,
me.
sorry, sorry. Go on. Sorry, go on.
I the other type of movie I wanted to touch on. It begins in the '80s, uh, and it really is like a big deal in the '90s. Is the synthesis of action and sci-fi. I think
Mhm.
it really starts with the Terminator, and then you get RoboCop. And by the time we get to the '90s with Terminator 2 and all the movies that spawned, you have the
You have
Matrix, and you
uh
have Eraser, you have Total Recall.
yeah.
The synthesis between the action movie, Universal Soldier, and
Oh
sci-fi
my
is
goodness.
really kind of just a defining point of the 1990s action movie as well.
Do you remember the name of the cyborg movie that had? Well, it was a movie about a military cyborg that had a black guy as the titular
Is
cyborg.
it like a ripoff of Universal Soldier?
Um, Not exactly.
I don't even
It's
know. I mean, Universal Soldier is already. It didn't like Cyborg come first.
black cyborg movie. Let's see.
Yeah,
Mm,
Cyborg came first in '89.
yes, yeah, cyborg. Yeah. Um,
Both Van Damme though.
about black robot. About black robot. Is it?
Anyway,
Yeah.
um, oh, go ahead.
Oh no. Sorry, please go on.
But a lot of the action movies of the '90s are kind of the synthesis of sci-fi. I think a reason for that is that sci-fi kind of struggles to be. It struggles as a formula for film because sci-fi is mainly centers around world building.
Uh huh.
And so I don't think that translates into film because it just kind of causes the plot in a lot of sci-fi novels to be really minimalistic, and any kind of action is really minimalistic because the focus is on the world building and the ideas of what that world would be like. And so sci-fi for a long time, I know like the 1950s there is like, the monster movie, the sci-fi monster movie, but sci-fi, pure sci-fi as sci-fi usually struggles to be adopted into film because of that reason. And I think that
Interesting.
when sci-fi really became popular is where you get into the 80s and especially the 90s with the synthesis of action sci-fi or sci-fi
Mhm,
action, right?
mhm.
Beginning, I don't know necessarily beginning, but kind of typified by Terminator, which of course, Terminator 2 is your favorite movie of all time. And how many
Yep.
times have you seen Terminator 2?
Literally over 1,000. I shit you not.
How long ago was the last time you saw Terminator 2?
About 3 weeks ago, I think.
Okay.
I mean, I. Oh, by the way, I found the Black Cyborg movie. It's called Solo,
Oh, okay.
and its
It's not the
subtitle is.
same as the Star Wars Solo.
It's a lot better than the Star Wars Solo.
Good.
Yeah. So the subtitle is called Part Man, Part Machine, Total Weapon.
Damn.
We really have to watch these movies. So against a budget of 19 million, uh, it managed to retrieve 5 million. So it was a loss. Uh,
Sad.
but it did, but it did have Adrian Brody in it. So that's good. So that's good.
Anyway,
Yeah.
moving backward in time, um, do you think that a lot of do you think that PG-13 contributed to the decline of the action movie? I think we're kind of moving after we get out of the 90s. Um,
Yes. Yes.
we
Yeah.
should get into the decline. I guess there's one thing before we get into the decline, though. Um, do you do you want to talk about kind of like the high concept or the kind of like isolated setting action movie, Die Hard, Speed, Cliffhanger, where you have an action movie where it's kind of like this high concept where it's set in like an isolated area or within an isolated area, starting with Die Hard, and that was kind of a big deal in the '90s too.
Yes. So the thing about Speed, as well as its terrible sequel, Speed 2, Cruise Control. I don't know if I've watched it, but you should. It's really, really, really awful.
Yeah,
Um,
a guy at
yeah.
work was telling me about it the
The
other day.
What a terrible movie. No. So Speed is basically Die Hard on a bus, right? Um,
Hmm.
and Die Hard, I think, it lends. I mean, now that you mention it, uh, the Harrison Ford movie Air Force One is Die Hard on a plane.
And
Executive
so is Con
decision,
Air.
and so is Con Air, and so is
And
executive
Under
decision
Siege is Die Hard. Isn't that Die
on a
Hard on a
ship.
boat?
Yeah, yep, yep,
Yeah.
yeah. And I
Cliffhanger's
think
Die Hard on a mountain.
Under Siege Two, Under Siege Two is Die Hard on a train. So, yeah, I think I don't think there are all that many movies that manage to capture um so well the both the claustrophobia of being trapped, um, and mm, combine that with uh, b- 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 a- action that kids of all ages will like, right? Um, yeah, because my dad watches a lot of action movies, and he's like what, like he's like 66 now. I mean, yeah. So, so as I said, boys of all ages, kids of all ages like action movies. Yeah. So
Let's get now that we talked about the isolated
yeah,
claustrophobic action movie, the Die Hard ripoff. Let's start to get into the decline, which I think the '90s is just as much a golden age as the '80s. There's numerous gems in the '90s, but I think the decline is really in the 2000s. Um, Something a lot of people have pointed out. Do you think that PG-13 is something that undermined action films.
PG-13 100%. I mean, just look at how Terminator 3 performed. Terminator 2 was NC-17, right? I mean, that's the rating it got here, even though I watched it when I was 3 years old. So, make of that what you will. But Terminator 3 was PG-13. There was, no blood to speak of. The violence was comical. Um, and um, wasn't Die Hard 4 also?
To Live Free or Die Hard is PG-13.
Yeah.
Yeah, so PG-13, I mean, began the first PG-13 movie was Red Dawn in 1984, and Red
Uh-huh.
Dawn is a would be R today. So if you go back into PG-13 in the 80s when PG-13 just started, a lot of those movies would now be R, and PG-13 itself has been watered down. And so over time, PG-13 has become, of course, the dominant movie, and Britain and Canada. I just kind of think that they're just so connected to America that I just want to call it like the Anglosphere film industry. So I'm just gonna see if I can bring this up. But I think that there's an absolute majority of theatrically released films are PG-13 now.
Oh
Hey,
wow! Look who joined
Look
us,
who
Terlian.
came.
Just yeah, Terlian. Hey, buddy.
So so do you think that PG-13 makes movies suck?
that's a good question. I feel like I'm the wrong person to ask. I came to say hi and pretend to be Fat Albert. Um, Suck? I don't know. What do you think?
Uh, it seems that Nice Mean Fryer is on that bandwagon. I don't know if I'm as hard on that as PG-13 undermines movies, but it definitely PG-13 has become watered down over time. The main audience or the main easiest way to make your film perform well is have a PG-13 so that parents can bring kids because they won't be fearful of boobs. And
Right.
this kind of a general thing that's caused the watered down of the action movie. At the same time, in the 2000s, that's the first time when CGI is really something you can use as a fix-all, right? In the 1990s and earlier with like Abyss, there was CGI. Jurassic Park is really the breakthrough film for CGI. But even throughout the 90s, CGI was kind of like the secondary thing that is very expensive. And so throughout the 90s, CGI was just kind of just something special to be used when something else wouldn't suffice. So a lot of like practical effects continue throughout the 90s to have kind of a pride of place. Even if we don't think about it in retrospect, that's kind of the fact. If you go back to a lot of those movies, is that a lot of movies in the 90s had a pride of place, and in the 2000s, you kind of start to see CGI push things out, and as time goes on into the 2010s, definitely CGI becomes a default, and CGI leads to a lot more cartoonish action, which is easier to put into PG-13.
I have a question. So would
Mm-hmm.
the would the Final Destination movies be PG-13, or would they
Some of them are PG-13, some of them are R, I think.
because one of the very many insightful things that Knight Aaron told me was that the Final Destination movies were second date movies, right? I mean, it's when you know teens would take their dates to well, not to watch exactly, but to make out as the movie ran in
I
the
think they're
theater.
all. It's looking like they're all R.
Oh, okay. Well, Well, okay,
I mean,
we'll
those
chalk this.
movies literally involved women in bikinis getting fried in tanning
There's some
vents.
gore in them, so
Wasn't that just the third one or the second one? I think it was. I think it was one of them. I've pretty much watched every single one of them. They were pretty good.
yeah. So anyway, we have our Tard Wrangler here, so maybe the podcast will get clearer and more understandable that Trillian has entered the chat. But I think
I
that
love you,
CGI
buddy.
just kind of underwrites the action movie because, like I said before, the appeal of the action movie is the action itself. So if you're watching a car race, you want to watch cars actually get in crashes, actually get flipped over, actually get wrecked, actually blow up. If you're watching gunshots, you want to see an actual squid. You want to see an actual gun be shot with an actual like muzzle flash. When you see somebody get punched, you want them to bounce back from being hit. You want to see somebody actually make kinetic contact. And so the very idea, I think, of CGI underwrites and waters down, and it is kind of antithetical to the action film.
Yes.
You mean it undermines it?
Yeah, I think it undermines it because what you watch the action film is to do is you want to see things physically be destroyed. You want to see physical violence. And because CGI is synthetic violence, it undermines the action film. It undermines the very appeal of the action film. And of course, with the release of CGI or it becoming more and more widely used, that leads into the superhero film. And
because action movies as a genre declined in that period of time where CGI hadn't really matured, right?
mm-hmm.
So, I mean, Terminator Salvation was one of the last large budget movies that made use of a live action live action of practical effects in addition to CGI. And that's why it looked so good compared to Transformers, which came out around the same time, right?
Even the original Transformers has markedly more practical effects than the later Transformers. Each succession of the Transformers movie declines in the use of practical effects. I just kind of think that in general, the superhero film has kind of been detrimental to the action film. It's kind of like the kryptonite of the action film to the popular audience. It undermines what is important to the action film. And that's because while superheroes while action film main characters are chads, a lot of being a chad, a lot of being a charismatic hero that somebody wants to emulate has to do with vulnerability. All the roles that Stallone or Schwarzenegger or Van Damme or all those major characters would have done. All those characters, all those actors in those films are depicted as being vulnerable to being killed. While like in Die Hard, Bruce Willis's character may do things that are quasi superhuman that you couldn't really do in real life. You couldn't sustain that much damage. He sustains significantly more damage than any other superhero within that movie. His feet get mulched up. He goes through the window, right? He just is put through a lot more pain. Rambo is put through a lot more pain during the course of that movie. And even in the sci-fi movies, those characters endure a lot more pain than a superhero does. A superhero is fundamentally, within a superhero film, vulnerable. They do not take pain. They do not take damage. The audience is not basically does not fear them. While in most there are a few examples of the action hero dying in the classic action film. They don't they you know that they're not going
Interesting.
to die because they're the main character, but they're going to get cut, they're going to get bruised, they're going to feel pain, while the
Yeah.
superhero is invulnerable. And I think that undermines the stakes and the appeal of the action movie. They just don't mix.
Sometimes the action hero gets arrested, as happens in one of the as happens in two Bruce Lee movies incidentally. Although, yeah, uh, I'm talking about the Chinese Connection, which released in Asia, I believe, as the Big Boss. He is arrested at the end of the movie, um, whereas in Fist of Fury, no, Fists of Fury, the Chinese Connection, aka the Big Boss, was also in certain releases known as a Fist of Fury. So Fists of Fury, um, he does jump into a line of policemen trying to shoot him, and he does get shot. I mean, the screen blacks out, but then it's believed that he gets shot. Yeah, so the the action hero can get arrested. I mean, in Terminator 2, he famously sacrifices himself. In the first Terminator movie, Michael Biehn dies. Um, right? In executive decisions, Steven Seagal falls out of an aircraft. So, which actually happens, and it's one of the best scenes ever. Uh,
Yeah, it's and there's different stakes. So I think that if you're going to be an audience member, as we talked about action films being like this vicarious wish fulfillment,
uh-huh.
when you watch the film, you feel that the stakes are something you can relate to. If somebody's girlfriend or daughter or your son or something, right, is kidnapped, well, you're going to have a loved one. Like, you can relate to John Matrix in Commando when his daughter is kidnapped. You can't relate to the entire world is going to be destroyed by Cartoon Man. They're just two completely different things. Well, you might not be, you know, a bodybuilder. You might not be skilled in martial arts. You might not be able to do all these talents that the heroes are doing. That is something that is attainable to people, to yourself or people you know. It is within the realm of human possibility that you could do those things. And that those stakes that occur to those characters are significantly more personal in action films, while in superhero films, the stakes are very abstract. It's always like the world is at risk, right? And then the other thing is you can never be that character because human beings can't lift up tens of thousands of tons of shit, right? Like you can't be Superman. You can't fly. You can't be shot in the head and the bullet just bounces off of you.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about earlier was the rise of the femoid figure. So I know that Underworld and the Resident Evil series were financially successful, but they're just not appealing in the same way. Your brain, when it sees a 120 or 130 pound woman get in a fist fight with a 180 guy or 190 pound or 200 pound guy, your brain knows that's impossible. Your brain knows that the weakest man can easily overwhelm the strongest woman. And so in the 2000s, this kind of the beginning of the push for the feminist hero in the action film begins, and I think that undermines them as well.
Right.
Another thing that we talked about before is that in the 2000s and definitely into the 2010s, you have kind of like this push that everything should be in a franchise and this push for nostalgic dollars. So I think that with the Expendables, as we talked about before, there was this push to try and make all these people from the 80s continue on when they are just unable to be that nimble, that strong as they were in their prime. And, they are crowding out the newcomers to be action stars at that point.
Right.
So when you have all these like, Die Hard 5 and Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull and whatever the shit Indiana Jones 5 is called, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny and the Mansplaining or whatever it's called. Those movies just kind of undermine their entire series by bringing back these actors which are far too old to do that role. They undermine their prior series and they crowd out newer talent which could be the Chads of today. Is there any other things that you kind of led to decline of the action film in your mind?
I think a lot of it also involves the it's something that we spoke about. Even though there's been an explosion in people going to the gym, we for some reason just don't have any super well built action heroes anymore. I mean, we just don't, and I don't know why that is, but I mean, we do have it. Like, we do have that problem.
See, I feel like that maybe there's some kind of political avenue there. Just kind of the further rise of feminism is just preventing that type of film from being made, and that type of actor or charismatic leading man from taking that role. I guess there is like Jason Momoa and Chris Hemsworth, I guess, would fit that bill. But they're also sunk into the stupid ass superhero movies.
That is true, yeah. Also, wasn't Chris Hemsworth in at least one of the Expendables movies?
I don't know. I never saw the third one.
Okay. I think he was in the second one, though. But anyway, I think we've basically covered what we wanted to cover. Right?
We should cover the whole Terminator series.
We should. Yes.
Guys, we
My
should
God,
watch
yeah.
Enter the Dragon sometime and just like make jokes about it and just have fun watching it. And then that
We
could
should
sort
do
of
that.
move us to the next step. I know jack shit about action movies though, so
That's fine. I mean,
Can you tell us why you are opposed to Roadhouse?
me or
Yes. Why are you a Roadhouse hater? Why are you not part of the elect?
2 reasons. One, it's full of boobs. And I don't like watching movies that are full of boobs. 2, for some reason, thought it was a good idea to show that movie when we had a woman around. Which is just kind of like, what the fuck? Finally, it's just kind of like meandering and incoherent.
yeah.
So basically, you're saying is this good?
No, in fact, I also think Patrick Swayze is just not a very good action star.
Bye. This brings an end to episode 10 of Isildur Shaft. We'll be back again fairly soon with an analysis of Terminator 1 and 2.